Welcome back to Sleepy Science Tales. It's wonderful to have you with us this evening. A calm corner where your thoughts can loosen, your body can unwind, and you can drift towards sleep while we explore the natural world together in a soft and soothing rhythm. Tonight's journey is a little different from our usual explorations of mountains, rivers, oceans, and stars. Instead, we are stepping into a calm and thoughtful imagining of something that many scientists have wondered about, something that stretches across ecosystems, food webs, forests, and farms. What would happen if every bee on Earth suddenly died? It is a question that feels almost unreal, yet it offers us a peaceful doorway into understanding how deeply connected life truly is. Before we begin, if you feel comfortable, I would love for you to leave a comment sharing where you are listening from tonight. People from all over the world gather here to unwind, and your comment helps others feel that same sense of community, calm, and connection. Now, settle in, breathe slowly, let your muscles release, and allow your mind to follow this soft, unfolding story. As you relax, let's begin at the very start of our imagined scenario. Bees have been a part of Earth's ecosystems for more than 100 million years. They evolved alongside flowering plants, developing intricate relationships that shaped both their future and the future of entire landscapes. Almost every colorful meadow, orchard, garden, and flowering forest you can imagine has been shaped in some way by bees. They visit flowers gently, carrying grains of pollen from one bloom to another. This small movement allows plants to form seeds and fruit. It feeds birds, nourishes insects, supports mammals, and creates cycles that stretch across continents. But tonight, in our gentle thought experiment, we imagine a moment when all bees disappear at once. No buzzing in gardens, no drifting shapes moving between flowers, no hives hidden between branches. A quietness falls over the world, so soft at first that most people would not notice anything unusual. Imagine the first morning without bees. The sky looks the same. The wind moves through leaves in the same soothing way. Trees sway gently, flowers open their petals to welcome the sun, and the world carries on with familiar rhythm. Yet something subtle is missing. The soft hum of wings is gone. Flowers that rely on bees open in expectation, but no pollinators arrive. This is not a dramatic moment. It's quiet, delicate, almost undetectable. Nature does not collapse instantly. Instead, a slow, invisible shift begins, almost like the faint turning of a season. Now imagine the first week in this quieter world. Most fruits currently on trees and bushes were pollinated weeks or months earlier, so they continue to grow. Vegetables already forming continue to expand. Gardens still look colorful and lively. Markets remain full. But hidden within this beauty, a silent change is unfolding. Plants that relied on bees for pollination begin producing fewer seeds. Wildflowers open beautifully but do not receive the pollen they need. Early signs appear, but they blend into the background, unnoticed by most people living their daily lives. After a few weeks without bees, a soft shift becomes more apparent to those who know where to look. Beekeepers notice empty hives, lifeless boxes that once held tens of thousands of bees. Farmers who rely on bees to pollinate crops start to observe unusual patterns. Blossoms fall away without forming fruit. Orchard branches carry fewer developing apples, pears, plums, and cherries. Gardeners see flowers opening but not producing new vegetables. Still, Many people across cities and towns continue their routines without noticing anything major. Nature hides its changes in delicate layers, revealing them slowly, like turning pages in a long, quiet book. Now take a calming breath as we drift 1 month into this imagined timeline. Some crops begin showing lighter yields. Strawberries appear in smaller quantities. Blueberries form sparsely on bushes. Avocado orchards, which depend heavily on pollination partners, already show early signs of reduced fruiting. In fields where melons, pumpkins, or cucumbers usually grow with abundance, the early patterns of decline appear. But because harvest cycles unfold slowly, many of these changes feel scattered and subtle. The world still looks familiar, yet something is shifting beneath the surface. Move now into the gentle passage of 2 months. Beekeepers make public their concerns. Researchers begin running surveys. Gardeners exchange puzzled conversations about why blossoms are not turning into fruit. Farmers attempt hand pollination, gently brushing pollen from one flower to the next, but it's time-consuming and limited. Some crops can be helped in this way, but not the vast, sprawling fields that rely on natural pollinators. In forests and meadows, fruiting plants produce far fewer berries. Birds that migrate along berry-rich routes begin to feel the scarcity. Mammals that feed on summer or autumn fruit find fewer natural snacks. The earliest signs of ecological shift ripple through ecosystems quietly, softly, almost like a slow tide. Now let us drift gently into the 1-year mark. A full cycle of seasons has passed without bees. The effects are no longer subtle. Almond groves, which rely almost entirely on bees, produce very few nuts. Apple orchards yield a fraction of their usual harvest. Many vegetables that rely on blossoms, like squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, and numerous varieties of peppers, become rare. Fields that normally glow with color during harvest season stand quieter, greener, less fruitful. Markets around the world begin to see imports shift. Certain foods become expensive or seasonal in new ways. Diets change without fanfare, gradually adjusting to the new limitations. Yet ecosystems continue their quiet transformation. Meadows that once burst into color now show reduced diversity. Wildflowers that relied on bee pollination appear less frequently. Some species vanish from certain regions entirely. Forests that once produced abundant berries struggle to feed wildlife. Bears searching for late summer berries find fewer bushes bearing fruit. Birds like cedar waxwings, robins, and thrushes experience reduced food availability. Animals adapt as best they can, shifting their behaviors, migrating differently, or seeking new feeding grounds. Take another slow breath as we move into the 2nd year of this imagined world. Without bees, the landscapes that once celebrated seasonal bursts of color slowly become more uniform. Some plants adapt with the help of other pollinators. Flies, beetles, butterflies, moths, and hummingbirds continue their roles, but on a far smaller scale. They are helpers, but they cannot replace the immense pollination work once done by billions of bees around the world. Plants dependent on bees for reproduction begin shrinking in population, becoming rare, fragmented, or unable to spread naturally across the land. In agriculture, farmers turn to new strategies. Some regions train workers to hand pollinate flower by flower. In certain countries, large teams walk through orchards during bloom season with soft brushes, dusters, or tools designed to mimic the motion of bees. This works in small areas, but global agriculture is vast. and the demand far exceeds the capacity of human labor. Many farms shift toward crops that rely on wind pollination or no pollination at all. Wheat, corn, rice, oats, and barley continue to grow steadily as they rely on breeze rather than bees. Over time, these grains become far more central in diets around the world. As we drift through the soft passage of 3 years without bees, ecosystems show clearer signs of imbalance. Wildflower meadows no longer bloom with the same density. Pollination networks become thinner and more fragile. Plants that depended entirely on bees face steep declines. Entire landscapes begin to lose pockets of diversity. Orchard-based communities shift their focus, replanting fields with crops that do not require insect pollination. Grocery stores carry less of the produce once easily available year-round. Certain fruits become rare treats. Some become regional luxuries. The global food system gradually reorganizes. Now breathe gently as we step softly into year 5. This is where the deepest ecological changes become visible. Without bees, many flowering species fail to reproduce. Some persist only through vegetative growth, surviving year to year but unable to spread. Forests lose many of their berry-producing shrubs. Meadows lose many of their nectar-rich blues. Insects that relied on those flowers decline. Birds that fed on the seeds of those plants decline as well. A quiet simplification of ecosystems occurs. Not a collapse, but a dimming. A gentle but persistent reduction in complexity. By year 7, landscapes once buzzing with life feel noticeably different. Fewer flowers bloom in early spring. Fewer fruiting plants color the summer and autumn months. Pollinators that remain butterflies, moths, certain beetles take over tiny portions of the lost roles, but they cannot recreate the abundance once shaped by bees. Entire food webs adjust around the missing link. Take another calming breath as we soften into the 10-year mark. A full decade has passed in our timeline without bees. Children growing up during this time may not remember a world filled with buzzing gardens or vibrant meadows. They know a quieter environment, one marked by wind-pollinated crops, simple fields, abundant grains, and landscapes less rich in flowering diversity. Fruit, once so common, becomes an occasional indulgence. Forest animals adapt or shift their diets. Birds adjust migration patterns. Mammals forage differently. The world does not end. It changes. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. Yet even in this imagined world, nature does what nature always does. It adapts, reshapes, redistributes, and continues forward. Life settles into new rhythms. Ecosystems adjust to new baselines. The absence of bees becomes part of the planet's new balance. Take one more slow breath as the first chapter of this story comes to a close. Picture yourself in a peaceful meadow at dusk, surrounded by tall grasses and soft colors. The sky glows gently. The breeze passes lightly through the air. It is quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to feel the scale of the story we are exploring. A story about connection, partnership, and the subtle ways small creatures shape the world. Let your breath fall into a slow, steady rhythm as we continue drifting forward through this imagined world without bees. We ended our last chapter at the 10-year mark, a point where ecosystems had already reshaped themselves, markets had changed, and landscapes felt noticeably quieter. Now we'll move deeper, stepping softly into the unfolding decades, exploring how life continues adapting in ways large and small. Imagine the world 15 years after the disappearance of bees. By now, entire generations of flowering plants that once depended on bees have declined dramatically. Some species survive only in regions where other pollinators or wind occasionally help them reproduce. Many specialized wildflowers vanish from areas where bees were their only partners. Meadows that once held hundreds of flowering species might now hold only dozens. The colors remain, but the variety is softer, narrower, and more muted. Landscapes become shaped by plants that can reproduce without insects, or by those assisted by the remaining pollinators like flies and beetles. Nature has not collapsed, but it has simplified, becoming a quieter version of itself. As the world drifts into the 20th year without bees, agriculture reflects this new reality. Many fruit orchards have been replaced by crops that thrive without pollination. Grain farms spread across plains, their golden fields shimmering under the sun. Wheat, oats, barley, rice, and corn form the backbone of human diets. Root vegetables such as potatoes, carrots, and turnips remain stable. Legumes like soybeans and lentils continue to grow reliably. Yet foods like cherries, blueberries, almonds, apples, pumpkins, and melons have become rare specialities, grown only in small, carefully managed regions using artificial pollination tools or manual labor. People adapt their recipes, their habits, and their expectations. Children grow up in a world where fruit is an occasional treat rather than an everyday staple. Take another slow breath and imagine the 25-year mark. Wildlife populations reflect decades of subtle but steady shifts. Birds that relied heavily on fruiting plants decline or change their migration routes. Certain mammals adapt by shifting their diets, turning to bark, shoots, roots, or insects instead of berries. Species that once depended on bee-pollinated flowers for nectar adjust by finding new sources of food or by reducing their ranges. Butterflies and moths continue to survive, but the flowers they once visited are fewer and more scattered. They flutter across wider distances to find nourishment, living shorter lives and raising fewer young. Ecosystems are still functional, still full of life, but the compositions have changed gently over decades. Now imagine reaching 30 years without bees. Forest structures show long-term signs of transformation. Plants that once filled the understory with color and fruit are now absent in many regions. Instead, forests are dominated by shrubs and trees that rely on wind pollination or self-pollination. Grasses flourish in open meadows, filling spaces once occupied by clusters of flowering plants. The air carries a different rhythm. The blooming seasons feel more muted. The buzzing layers of sound that once filled warm afternoons have faded into memory. New generations see this quieter world as normal, unaware of the richness that once existed. Slow your thoughts as we drift to the 40-year mark. Across the world, scientists and ecologists document the emergence of entirely new ecological communities. With bees gone, certain plants have evolved new strategies, adjusting their flowering timing or producing more pollen to attract the remaining, less efficient pollinators. Some species that relied on bees have shifted gradually toward wind pollination through subtle genetic changes. Evolution moves slowly, but across decades, even small adjustments accumulate. Flowers become less nectar-rich, less sweet, less colorful. Plants stop investing energy into attracting partners that no longer exist. They divert their energy to survival rather than allure. At the same time, some animals that relied heavily on bees, such as honey-eating birds or mammals that raided hives, shift their diets or move to new regions. Bears that once fed on honey now turn more to roots and fish. Birds that once fed on bee larvae find alternative food sources. Small mammals that once lived near hives spread into new territories. The world is different, but still alive, still adapting, still reshaping its patterns. Take another deep, quiet breath as we drift to the 50-year mark. Half a century without bees. Humans living today may remember stories from their grandparents about gardens filled with flowers and orchards overflowing with fruit. But for most people, the world feels balanced in its new simplicity. Global agriculture has changed completely, structured around crops that do not need external pollinators. Technology plays a greater role in pollination where fruit crops remain. Some regions use airborne pollen sprayers. Others rely on gentle robotic tools designed to mimic the touch of insects. It is labor-intensive and costly, so fruit remains a luxury. The global diet is shaped by grains, roots, hardy vegetables, and preserved foods. In the natural world, grasslands expand. Wetlands remain stable. Forests adjust to the reduced variety of flowering understory plants. Rivers and lakes continue to support fish, amphibians, and aquatic plants. Mountain slopes grow thick with shrubs that thrive without pollinators. Even without bees, the world finds structure, though with less complexity and fewer delicate interactions. Now breathe gently as we drift toward the 60-year mark. New generations of flowering plants have evolved traits that no longer resemble their ancestors. Many produce smaller blooms. Others shift towards self-fertilization. Colors that once attracted bees, bright yellow, vivid blue, intricate ultraviolet patterns fade into more neutral tones. Landscapes lose some of their brilliance, becoming softer, calmer, and more uniform. It is a world of greens, golds, and quiet whites, rather than the rainbow meadows of centuries past. The 70-year mark arrives with ecosystems that feel slow, steady, and muted. Fruit-eating animals are far fewer. Pollinator diversity is greatly reduced. Winds carry more pollen across open spaces as more plant species evolve toward wind-based reproduction. The atmosphere contains slightly more airborne plant particles during blooming seasons, creating a hazy shimmer on warm afternoons. People adapt to this just as they adapt to every natural change. As we drift now to the 80-year point, entire cultures have adapted their agriculture, their cuisines, and their traditions around a world without bees. The idea of fresh fruit is something celebrated during certain times of the year, similar to rare seasonal delicacies. Traditional recipes evolve. New flavors emerge. People learn to find joy and nourishment in different ways. Finally, imagine reaching the 100-year mark. A full century has passed. The world is stable again, but its balance is different from the one we knew. Plant evolution has shifted the palette of the earth. Animal populations have redistributed. Farmers grow crops suited to this new ecology. Children learn about bees the same way we learn today about extinct creatures. They become symbols of another time, reminders of how deeply life on Earth is interwoven. As this chapter closes, imagine yourself again in a quiet meadow at dusk. The grasses sway softly. The sky is calm. The world is peaceful in its own way. And although bees have been gone for a century in this imagined timeline, life continues. It finds new rhythms, new pathways, new forms of balance. Nature always adapts, slowly, thoughtfully, quietly. Take a quiet breath and settle comfortably as we continue drifting through this gentle exploration. Let your shoulders soften as we move deeper into the slow, unfolding timeline of a world without bees. We have already seen the first seasons pass, the first flowers left unvisited, the first crops struggling to reproduce. Now we step softly into the next phase, the years when the absence of bees begins to ripple outward through fields, forests, rivers, and the quiet rhythms of daily life. Imagine that 2 or 3 full years have now passed since the last bee disappeared from the sky. The world still looks familiar in many ways, yet subtle changes have begun to deepen. Meadows that once glowed with color feel quieter. Forest edges show gaps where flowering shrubs failed to seed. Farms that once produced abundant harvests now face lower yields each year, and the plants themselves seem tired, as though missing a vital part of their life cycle. In orchards, trees still bloom, but their blossoms fall without purpose. Apples, cherries, plums, pears, peaches, and almonds all relied heavily on bees to carry pollen from flower to flower. Without those pollinators, the trees produce only a fraction of their usual fruit. Some trees still manage small harvests through wind, gravity, or occasional visits from birds or beetles, but the decline is steady and noticeable. Entire orchards begin to show more empty branches, fewer seeds, and thinner canopies. Now let your mind drift gently to the countryside, where farmers walk through their fields, observing changes they cannot ignore. Crops like pumpkins, melons, cucumbers, berries, and sunflowers struggle the most. These plants depend on bees visiting their blossoms repeatedly to ensure full pollination. Without bees, the fruits that do form are smaller, misshapen, or fail to mature. Some fields remain green but produce very little edible food. Others produce tiny fruits that never ripen fully. Farmers try to adapt by hand-pollinating flowers with brushes or cotton swabs, but the scale of the task is overwhelming. A single acre of fruit trees can have millions of blossoms. Without bees, the labor required is immense, and the cost becomes too high for most farms to sustain. As the years continue, the consequences spread from farms to markets. Supermarkets begin noticing shortages of foods that were once abundant. Berry shelves empty earlier in the season. Nut harvests shrink. The price of certain fruits climbs higher each year. Some stores reduce their selection, offering only a handful of varieties that still thrive without bees. Many foods become rare treats rather than everyday choices. People adjust by eating more grains, more root vegetables, and more staple crops that do not require bee pollination. Now picture the quiet transformations happening in wild landscapes. In many grasslands, the flowers that depended on bees begin to thin out. Purple asters, goldenrods, clovers, lupines, and countless other wildflowers produce fewer seeds each year. Some still manage to reproduce through wind or insects that are not bees, but their numbers fall slowly. Without bees visiting them, their life cycles weaken. Fewer seeds means fewer flowers. Fewer flowers means less nectar for the remaining pollinating insects. The decline becomes a gentle but steady cascade, where one missing connection leads to several others, weakening over time. In forests, similar changes unfold quietly beneath the trees. Shrubs like blueberries, raspberries, elderberries, and huckleberries rely heavily on bees. As they produce fewer berries, the animals that depend on them feel the impact. Bears find fewer summer feeding grounds. Birds that rely on berries for migration fuel struggle to find enough energy. Small mammals search longer for food, adjusting their diets toward plants that still grow, though often with less nutrition. Let your imagination drift toward the rivers and lakes where fish spawn and birds nest. Even aquatic ecosystems feel the absence of bees. Many insects that rely on flowering plants begin to decline, and these insects provide food for frogs, fish, and birds. The decline in bees subtly shifts the diets of entire food webs. Dragonflies, hummingbirds, and butterflies may increase their foraging in some regions, taking advantage of flowers that still bloom, yet their numbers alone cannot replace the pollination services bees once crass provided. The ecosystem seeks balance, but cannot fully fill the gap. Now imagine walking through a park or garden where flowering plants once filled the air with color and scent. Without bees, the diversity slowly fades. The hardy plants that rely on wind pollination or self-fertilizing are the ones that remain strong. Grasses and trees dominate. Dandelions, plantains, and clover patches grow unevenly, rising in some places and disappearing in others. The more specialized wildflowers lose ground. The landscape becomes quieter, simpler, and less vibrant. As we continue drifting gently through this imagined world, picture the subtle effects on humans living in towns and cities. Families begin to notice that favorite fruits cost more or are harder to find. Schools teach students about why certain foods are disappearing. Gardens become places of careful observation as people watch which plants still flower and set fruit without bees. Urban communities experiment with hand pollination and controlled indoor growing, but the scale of the challenge grows each year. Now shift your attention to the broader economic effects, still unfolding quietly. Farmers who once depended on bee pollination face lower yields and higher costs. Some switch to wind-pollinated crops like wheat, corn, oats, barley, and rice. Others plant new varieties that require minimal pollination. The agriculture industry gradually reshapes itself, focusing more on staple grains and less on fruits, nuts, and vegetables that once depended on bees. Rural communities feel these changes first, as shifts in crop types alter local economies and seasonal rhythms. At this stage in our timeline, around 3 years without bees, the world is not unrecognizable. People still grow food, flowers still bloom, and animals still forage. Yet the threads connecting species feel more fragile. The world feels slightly quieter, slightly less colorful, and slightly changed. The absence of bees does not cause an immediate collapse. Instead, it creates a slow, unfolding transformation, where the effects expand like ripples on a still lake. One plant declines, then another. One animal loses a food source, then another. One crop shrinks, then another. Take a gentle breath now as we move deeper into this calm, slow-moving scenario. Imagine the world after 5 to 7 years without bees. By this time, the changes have spread further. Some flowering plants have merely vanished from certain regions. Crops that once relied on honeybee pollination have become smaller industries or disappeared entirely from markets. Forests show more gaps where shrubs once flourished. Meadows have fewer colorful blues. Some birds and mammals have adapted, while others continue searching for food sources that no longer grow as plentifully as before. Humanity responds with creativity and resilience. Researchers develop new pollinating tools. Robotic pollinators appear in some experimental farms. Some regions employ teams of workers to hand-pollinate orchards during short blooming seasons. Greenhouses expand, allowing growers to pollinate by hand in controlled environments. Farmers adjust crop rotations, soil practices, and irrigation methods to support new types of plants. The world does not give up. It adapts slowly, gently, and with determination. Now let your awareness relax deeper as we approach the end of this stage. The absence of bees continues to shape the world quietly, transforming landscapes, agriculture, and daily life. The world remains beautiful in new ways, yet it carries a soft echo of lost colors, lost scents, and lost connections. The next chapters will explore what unfolds after a decade, after 2 decades, and beyond, as ecosystems settle into a new balance and humanity continues its gentle effort to care for the plants and animals that remain. Take another slow breath and let your body relax as we continue drifting deeper into this gentle timeline. We have traveled through the first uncertain seasons, through the quiet transformations of the early years, and into the slow unfolding of a world learning to live without bees. Now we step softly into the next decade, a period where the long-term consequences begin to settle into the landscape, shaping forests, farms, ecosystems, and human life in new and unexpected ways. Imagine now that 10 full years have passed since the last bee disappeared from the sky. The world has adjusted in countless small ways. Many people no longer remember the hum of insects drifting across summer fields. Children grow up in towns where fruit trees bloom without the familiar buzz of visiting pollinators. Older generations pause on spring mornings, remembering when the air once felt alive with movement and sound. A quiet stillness has settled over flowering seasons that once sparked vibrant life. At this point in the timeline, entire ecosystems have begun to organize themselves around the absence of bees. Some plants that depended heavily on bees have declined or disappeared in certain regions. Others survive only in areas where alternative pollinators have taken on a larger role. Wind pollination has increased its influence across the landscape, favoring plants with light, powdery pollen. Grasses, sedges, and many trees flourish, spreading more easily across fields and open spaces. These plants slowly become the dominant forms of vegetation in many areas, giving the world a more muted, green appearance than before. Now shift your imagination to a forest that has lived through a decade without bees. In the understory, shrubs that once burst with berries now appear sparse. Some still produce fruit, but not in the abundance they once did. Birds that relied on these berries have adapted in different ways. Some have shifted their diets toward insects, seeds, or other fruiting plants that remain. Others have migrated earlier or changed their nesting patterns. Animal behavior has subtly altered as each species adjusts to the quiet reordering of the forest's food web. Small mammals feel these changes too. Species like voles, mice, and squirrels once gathered seeds and nuts that depended on bee pollination. Now they search longer, following the shrinking patches where fruiting shrubs still survive. Some populations stabilize after initial declines, relying more heavily on fungi, roots, and wind-pollinated seeds. Others move into new regions in search of food. The forest continues on, but with new patterns, new rhythms, and new balances. Now drift softly into farmlands that have also weathered a decade without bees. Many crops that once relied on heavy bee pollination have become small, specialized industries. Almonds exist only where human pollination teams or automated systems support them. Blueberries, melons, pumpkins, and certain vegetables now grow mostly in controlled environments, protected by greenhouses where blossoms can be pollinated by hand. Outdoor farms focus more heavily on crops that require little or no pollination, such as grains, legumes, root vegetables, and leafy greens. Agriculture has adapted, but its diversity has narrowed. Walk gently through a market in your imagination. The colors have shifted subtly. Shelves once filled with berries now feature occasional trays grown in indoor facilities. Stone fruits are rare and often marked as seasonal luxuries. Nuts are more expensive and more carefully rationed. Yet grains, potatoes, onions, cabbage, and other staple foods remain abundant. Humanity has not lost the ability to feed itself, but the variety of flavors and textures has changed. Many foods that once seemed ordinary now feel precious. Now imagine stepping into a meadow 20 years after the disappearance of bees. The field stretches quietly, filled mostly with grasses, wind-pollinated plants, and hardy flowers that rely on flies, beetles, or self-fertilization. Colorful blooms still appear in some places, but they are softer, more scattered, and less diverse than in earlier decades. The meadow hums with life, but the sound is softer, carried by different insects. Hoverflies dart through the air. Beetles move through leaf litter. Moths flutter gently at dusk. These species have expanded into niches once dominated by bees, yet their presence brings a different energy to the land. With bees gone, certain flowering plants that depended entirely on them have vanished from some regions. Orchids that required specialized bee partners exist only in botanical gardens or protected reserves. Some wildflowers survive only in small pockets where accidental cross-pollination still occurs. Over decades, these rare species become quiet relics of an earlier world, remembered mostly in books, photographs, and protected enclosures, where scientists continue to study their delicate structures. Now let your attention drift toward the broader food webs that developed during these decades. Birds that relied on insects from blooming plants now forage in different ways. Some populations shrink. Others shift their diets. Predators that depended on those birds also adapt, moving into new territories or adjusting their hunting patterns. The ripples continue outward, but they unfold slowly, giving ecosystems time to reorganize themselves. Larger animals feel the impact too. Herbivores that once fed on bee-pollinated plants must adjust to the changing availability of shrubs, berries, and flowering herbs. Deer, bears, monkeys, and many other species adapt by consuming more bark, roots, fungi, and leaves. Their diets change gradually, and in many cases, their ranges expand or contract according to food availability. Nature shows a quiet resilience. It does not collapse. It shifts, absorbs, bends, and redistributes its energy in new ways. Now, imagine the human world 20 years after bee extinction. Society has implemented vast changes to support food production. Greenhouses powered by renewable energy provide fruits that once grew easily outdoors. Hand pollination teams work during short blooming windows in orchards that remain economically viable. Experimental pollinating drones assist with crops that cannot be sustainably pollinated by hand. New plant varieties have been developed to require less pollination or to self-fertilize more effectively. Cities grow more food on rooftops and vertical gardens, where pollination can be carefully managed. People adapt their diets. Fruit becomes an occasional treat, appreciated for its rarity. Vegetables from wind-pollinated plants play a larger role in meals. Nuts and seeds come from carefully maintained orchards or controlled farms. Honey no longer exists in its familiar form, though scientists may develop artificial substitutes for flavor and texture. Humanity continues, resilient and inventive, learning to live within new ecological boundaries. Even in this imagined future, the memory of bees remains. Some communities create public gardens dedicated to the flowers once pollinated by bees, preserving their beauty even if they no longer bloom naturally in the wild. Artists paint murals honoring their delicate forms. Schools teach children about the role bees once played, helping new generations understand the importance of interconnected habitats. Yet nature continues writing new stories. Alternative pollinators take on greater significance. Hoverflies, wasps, beetles, butterflies, and certain birds expand their roles. Though none fully replace the efficiency or scale of bees, the ecosystems slowly find ways to stabilize. Life persists. Plants endure. Forests adapt. The world becomes quieter and more restrained, but still filled with gentle motion and the slow pulse of natural processes. Take another soft breath and let the calm of this imagined world settle gently around you. The story continues unfolding, decade by decade, as ecosystems find balance without bees, and humanity continues shaping new ways to grow and gather food. In the next chapter, we will drift into the far future, exploring what the world might look like after 30, 50, or even 100 years without bees, and how life adjusts across deep time. Take a slow breath and let your mind settle as we drift deeper into this long, quiet timeline. We are now several decades beyond the moment when the last bee vanished from the world. The early changes have long since passed, and the middle years have reshaped landscapes, diets, and ecosystems. Now we step softly into a world that has settled into new rhythms, a world that has transformed slowly and gently through the passing of time. Imagine now that 20 years have passed, and the memory of bees feels distant. Many children have grown up without ever hearing their hum or seeing them drift from flower to flower in morning light. Yet the world has not fallen into silence. Instead, it has reshaped itself into a different kind of balance. Plants, animals, and humans have adapted in ways both subtle and profound. In many places, forests have taken on a new structure. Without bees, certain shrubs and flowering trees that depended heavily on them have declined. Their absence has opened space for other plants to spread. Wind-pollinated species like birch, alder, pine, oak, and grasses now dominate larger regions. These forests feel familiar but slightly different, with fewer bright blossoms in spring and more soft movement of leaves in the wind. The colors are quieter, the textures gentler, and the understory has grown simpler and more uniform. Now, picture a hillside meadow in this future. Flowers still bloom, but the varieties are fewer. Hardier species adapted to wind pollination or self-fertilization continue to flourish. Plants visited by hoverflies, beetles, or moths survive in pockets where these pollinators remain active. The meadow has not lost its beauty. It has simply changed its palette, like a painting rendered in softer tones. Instead of a riot of colors, it offers calm fields of whites, greens, and pale yellows that ripple gently under warm breezes. Shift your mind now to the world of agriculture, 30 years after bees disappeared. Entire industries once dependent on bee pollination have evolved into something new. Instead of vast outdoor orchards, many countries have built indoor growing centers dedicated to fruits that once required bees. Inside these greenhouses, human workers and automated pollinating devices mimic the tasks bees once performed effortlessly. Blossoms are gently brushed with pollen. Plants are arranged in ways that allow airflow to carry pollen through controlled channels. Artificial lighting supports growth. In these spaces, fruit still forms, though on a smaller scale than it once did. Outdoor agriculture looks different too. Fields that once grew a wide range of vegetables now focus on hardy staples: wheat, corn, rice, oats, potatoes, beans, lentils, and squash varieties that self-pollinate or require minimal pollination make up the backbone of global diets. Farmers have become masters at cultivating these crops efficiently and reliably. Innovation has flourished. New plant varieties have been bred to produce higher yields using wind and self-fertilization alone. Grains remain abundant, and root vegetables continue to grow well in diverse climates. Take a gentle breath now, and imagine walking through a community garden in this future world. People still nurture plants, though the selection is different from earlier decades. They grow leafy greens, herbs, tomatoes, peppers, and beans in carefully arranged beds. Some gardeners hand-pollinate their crops during the flowering season, treating the process as a mindful ritual rather than a chore. Others rely on hoverflies or small pollinating wasps that have increased in urban areas, drawn to flowers that still offer nectar. The gardens thrive in their own quiet ways, shaped by care, patience, and a renewed appreciation for each harvest. Now let your thoughts drift into wild ecosystems 30 or 40 years after the disappearance of bees. Nature has continued adapting, adjusting its energy flow through new pathways. Some insect species that once shared pollination duties with bees have now expanded their roles. Hoverflies, which look like tiny bees with striped bodies, visit flowers in greater numbers. Beetles, ancient pollinators that predate bees by millions of years, continue their slow but steady work in certain ecosystems. Moths pollinate night-blooming flowers, carrying pollen silently through the darkness. Birds that feed on nectar, such as hummingbirds and sunbirds, expand into new territories where flowers still bloom abundantly enough to support them. Yet even with these new pollinators, the world feels gentler and more subdued. Diversity has narrowed, but stability has emerged. Ecosystems that once depended on a vast range of flowering plants now revolve around fewer species that have adapted successfully. Forest floors host carpets of ferns and mosses. Meadows show waves of grasses and hardy blooms. Mountain slopes hold clusters of shrubs that survive with limited pollination. Lake shores are lined with reeds, rushes, and wind-fed plants. Each region finds its own equilibrium, shaped by climate, geography, and the quiet persistence of species that endured. Now imagine how animals have adapted over these decades. Birds that once ate bee-pollinated seeds now rely more on wind-pollinated grains, or the insects that thrive in the new plant communities. Squirrels gather nuts from species that still produce them reliably. Bears forage more heavily for roots, shoots, fish, and the few remaining berry patches that survive in sheltered areas. Deer adjust their diets to include more bark and leaves. Many animals experience a shift rather than a collapse. Their behavior changes slowly over generations, adapting to the new patterns of their habitats. Humans adapt too. 30 years into this future, societies have reshaped their food systems, their urban planning, and even their cultural traditions. People rely more on foods that grow abundantly. Seasonal celebrations evolve to honor the plants that remain vibrant. Festivals once centered on spring blossoms now focus on the first green shoots of grain, or the soft unfurling of fern fronds in shaded forests. New culinary traditions emerge, celebrating root vegetables, legumes, and grains in creative ways. Now, picture a classroom in this future era. Children learn about bees as an important part of natural history. They study how interconnected ecosystems once functioned, how bees worked tirelessly to move pollen from flower to flower, and how their disappearance reshaped the world gently, steadily, and inevitably. Teachers guide students through gardens filled with wind-pollinated plants, explaining how life adapts across generations. Some schools maintain small botanical sanctuaries where surviving bee-dependent plants are grown in controlled environments, offering students a glimpse of the past. To these children, the world without bees feels natural, because it is the world they have always known. Take another soft breath as we move through the cultural changes that emerge over these decades. Artists paint landscapes filled with swaying grasses and soft colors. Poets write about the memory of buzzing fields. Gardeners become guardians of plant diversity, preserving heritage species and nurturing plants that need special care. Communities gather in public spaces to maintain shared gardens, recognizing that food production has become a communal effort rather than a solitary task. Technological innovation continues too. Pollination robots become more efficient. Artificial pollination chambers mimic the delicate structures of flowers to distribute pollen smoothly. Engineers develop materials that carry pollen precisely without harming fragile plant surfaces. Although these tools can never replicate the efficiency or elegance of bees, they help humanity maintain certain crops that would otherwise disappear entirely. Now let your mind drift gently toward the larger Earth systems shaped by these decades of change. With fewer flowering plants across vast regions, the seasonal bursts of nectar production that once fed entire insect communities no longer occur at the same scale. This reduces certain insect populations, which in turn influences the animals that eat them. The ripple effects continue outward but eventually stabilize. The Earth does not fall into imbalance. It shifts into a new kind of harmony, quieter and more restrained, yet still capable of supporting diverse life. Forests sequester carbon differently than before, with more biomass in trees and fewer wildflowers beneath. Grasslands expand in some areas, turning former orchards and flowering fields into rolling plains. Rivers carry slightly different mixes of nutrients, shaped by the changing vegetation along their banks. Everything adjusts in small increments, guided by the slow, persistent rhythms of nature. Now imagine the world 40 years after the disappearance of bees. The first generation that lived entirely without them is now grown, raising children of their own. For them, the world is full of beauty. They walk through quiet meadows, run their hands across soft grasses, marvel at the shapes of wind-pollinated flowers, and enjoy the fruits grown in greenhouses with careful pollination systems. They know that something once existed that made the world brighter and more colorful, yet their own world feels whole, calm, and familiar. Their grandparents tell them stories about the old days, when gardens buzzed with life and orchards glowed with blossoms that promised abundant fruit. The children listen with curiosity, imagining landscapes filled with tiny wind workers that move tirelessly from flower to flower. To them, bees are creatures of memory, symbols of an earlier chapter in Earth's story. Take one more gentle breath as we near the end of this chapter. The world without bees has not collapsed into catastrophe. Instead, it has evolved slowly, adapting to new forms of balance. Nature continues to grow. Humans continue to survive. Life continues to change, finding new pathways, new rhythms, and new ways of flourishing. In the next chapter, we will drift even further forward, exploring what the world could look like after 60, 80, or 100 years without bees, and how life continues reshaping itself over deep time. Take another slow breath and let your body soften as we drift further into the long future. We are now moving beyond half a century since the last bee lifted into the air. The early years of rapid change have long since passed. The decades of adjustment and rebalancing have settled into slower, quieter rhythms. The world continues to reshape itself gently, guided by time, by resilience, and by the steady persistence of life. Imagine now that nearly 60 years have passed. Entire generations have lived and grown old in a world without bees. Children who once learned about them as creatures from ancient stories are now adults raising families of their own. To them, the landscapes around them feel complete, peaceful, and familiar. They do not see absence. They see the world as it is, steady and calm beneath changing skies. Walk in your imagination through a forest 60 years after the disappearance of bees. The trees are tall and deeply rooted, their branches stretching into soft morning light. Wind-pollinated species remain dominant, shaping a canopy that moves like a single body in the breeze. The understory is gentler than it once was. Brightly colored flowers appear only in scattered patches, where alternative pollinators still maintain pockets of diversity. Most of the forest floor is covered in ferns, mosses, and shade-loving plants that require no assistance from bees. The forest feels tranquil, shaped by long seasons of steady growth, rather than bursts of vibrant bloom. Now picture the deep progression of plant evolution across these decades. Some flowering species that once depended entirely on bees have continued to evolve. They produce more pollen, but can travel on the wind. Their petals have grown narrower, allowing breezes to move through them easily. Some have shortened the space between male and female structures, increasing the chance of self-fertilization. Nature is inventive and patient. Over generations, plants shift toward traits that improve survival, moving gradually toward independence from absent partners. These changes unfold so slowly that they are invisible from year to year. Yet after 60 years, their impact can be seen across entire landscapes. Now let your imagination drift into grasslands shaped by 60 bee-free years. These plains are wider and more uniform than in earlier decades. Grasses sway in rhythmic patterns, carrying pollen across great distances. Herbs with small, winged-carried flowers flourish among them, forming carpets of soft color during certain seasons. These grasslands support vast communities of insects that thrive within dense vegetation. Many of these insects never relied heavily on flowers. They feed on leaves, stems, roots, or other insects. Their populations remain stable, providing food for birds, reptiles, and small mammals. Birds continue adapting too. Species that once relied heavily on bee-pollinated seeds have shifted toward grasses, sedges, and aquatic plants. Some birds have expanded their diets to include more insects that thrive in the new ecosystems. Hawks, owls, and foxes follow the movement of these smaller creatures, adjusting their territories and hunting patterns in ways that feel natural to them. Life continues its quiet dance, adjusting step by step. Take a gentle breath now, and imagine the agricultural world 60 years after bees vanished. Outdoor farms grow abundant grains, potatoes, legumes, and hardy vegetables. These crops form the foundation of global diets, and they are reliable, nutritious, and affordable. Fruits still exist, but they come mainly from climate-controlled facilities, where automated pollination systems operate with quiet precision. These fruits are appreciated, enjoyed, and valued. But they no longer appear daily in every household. Instead, they mark seasons, celebrations, and special gatherings. In some regions, innovations have allowed certain orchards to exist outdoors. These orchards rely on plant varieties bred to self-fertilize or to use wind as their primary pollination method. The fruit from these trees is smaller and less abundant, yet still sweet and nourishing. People treat these orchards with great care, understanding that they represent a deep collaboration between humanity and nature, built slowly over decades. Now wander gently into wetlands and lakeshores shaped by these decades. Reeds and rushes dominate the edges of the water. Cattails sway gently. Dragonflies glide above the surface. Amphibians nest in soft mud. Many plants here were always wind or water pollinated, so their ecosystems remain strong. These wetlands remain rich, vibrant, and full of life, reminding us that not all environments depended heavily on bees. Some continue changing only slightly, following the same ancient cycles they have followed for thousands of years. Let your thoughts drift deeper into this future, to around 70 years after bees disappeared. By now, the world has fully absorbed their absence. Pollination systems depend entirely on wind, water, self-fertilization, alternative insects, and human support. Botanists working in the 70-year future often describe nature as having settled into a new equilibrium. Diversity is not as high as it once was, but stability has returned. Ecosystems support themselves through new structures, new patterns, and new relationships. In this future, certain species once threatened by the sudden loss of bees have stabilized. Hoverflies, moths, beetles, and small wasps now play vital roles in regions where flowers still bloom. These creatures have expanded their ranges, adapting to climates and landscapes where bees once dominated. They visit blossoms during calm mornings and shaded afternoons. They carry small amounts of pollen from plant to plant, keeping some flowering species alive across wide areas. Their work is slower, less efficient, and less abundant than the work of bees. Yet nature does not measure progress by speed. It measures it by survival, by adaptation, and by persistence across generations. Imagine now, the forest 70 years after bee extinction. Large fruiting trees are rarer, but not gone. Those that survive do so in regions where birds, mammals, or alternative insects maintain some pollination. These trees produce fewer fruits, but each one is treasured by the animals that depend on them. The forest remains alive with movement. Squirrels leap across branches. Deer graze beneath shadows. Birds call softly through the trees. The world is quieter than it once was, but not empty. It is calm, steady, and peaceful. Now, shift your awareness into human communities 70 years into this future. People live with a deep understanding of ecological interdependence. Many cities are surrounded by green belts where plants grow without the need for pollinating bees. Some towns have rooftop gardens filled with vegetables that self-fertilize or require only simple hand pollination. Families teach their children about plant care as part of everyday life. Growing food has become a shared responsibility rather than a specialized skill. Take another slow breath as we drift toward the 80-year mark. At this point, the world without bees is older than many human lifetimes. It has become the new normal. Entire cultures have grown around the foods that thrive. Recipes passed down through generations rely on grains, legumes, and root vegetables. Families gather around meals that celebrate the flavors of this transformed world. Honey no longer exists, but people use herbal syrups, fruit reductions, and tree saps to sweeten their foods. These ingredients carry their own comforting aromas and traditions. In this future, science continues exploring natural solutions. Researchers examine plants that have evolved improved self-pollination. They study the behavior of hoverflies that have become dominant pollinators in some regions. They map the slow spread of moth pollination across night-blooming plants. They develop new agricultural systems that work in harmony with the reshaped world. These innovations feel natural, practical, and quietly hopeful. Now, imagine standing on a mountain ridge, 80 years after the disappearance of bees. The valley below you stretches outward in soft green tones. Grasses shimmer in gentle waves. Scattered clusters of hardy wildflowers dot the slopes. A few birds glide on warm currents of air. The world feels peaceful, shaped by decades of slow adjustment. Nature continues to breathe, grow, and move in its quiet ways. Take one more gentle breath as we close this chapter. The world without bees has become steady, balanced, and calm. It is different from the world that once existed, but it is still rich with life, still filled with color, still moving through the seasons with patient grace. In the next chapter, we will drift even further into the long future, exploring what the world might look like after a full century or more without bees, and how life continues to adapt across deep time. Take a slow, calming breath as we continue drifting through this long, unfolding timeline. 80 years have now passed since the last bee vanished from the world. Entire generations have grown up never hearing the soft hum of a hive, never seeing a drifting cloud of pollinators above fields or gardens, never feeling the delicate brush of a bee passing by on a warm afternoon. For the people alive now, bees are no longer a memory. They are a story told by elders, a creature preserved only in books, museums, and quiet nostalgia. And yet, even without bees, life on Earth has continued, reshaping itself gently, slowly, following patterns that unfold across decades. Picture the landscapes of this future world. Many regions that once bloomed with bursts of color now feel softer, gentler, quieter. Fields that once hosted orchards may now be covered with wind-pollinated grasses. The meadows that depended on bee-pollinated wildflowers have transformed into open stretches of herbs, ferns, and resilient shrubs. Each year, the wind carries seeds across valleys and hills, creating a new kind of beauty. Muted tones, waves of soft greens and pale golds, and pockets of hardy blossoms that rely on moths, beetles, or simple chants for pollination. In forests, the changes are deeper but calmer. Trees that relied heavily on bees-like certain fruit trees, flowering understory species, and specialized shrubs have grown rarer. But wind-pollinated giants such as oaks, birches, pines, and poplars now dominate more fully. Their pollen drifts through the air in gentle clouds each spring, settling across the forest floor like a whisper of golden dust. These forests feel older, cooler, and quieter than before. Their canopies sway softly, and new undergrowth forms where shade-tolerant species have taken the place of once flowering plants. Imagine walking through these future forests. The air feels still, calm, with a light earthy scent rising from the soil. Here and there, small flowers appear, those carried by beetles, flies, or the occasional butterfly, but they are fewer, scattered like shy survivors in a world slowly adjusting. Mosses spread across fallen logs. Ferns form dense, feathery carpets where flowering shrubs once grew. And though the colors are subtler, the sense of peace is deep and soothing. If you let your mind wander, you may begin to sense how the animal world has shifted too. Many species adapted over decades, finding new niches and new ways to survive. Some insects that once supplemented their diet with nectar have transitioned to feeding on sap, leaves, or decaying plant matter. Beetles and flies now handle much of the pollination performed by bees long ago, though they do so less efficiently. Butterflies continue their quiet, drifting paths across meadows, though their numbers fluctuate depending on the availability of the plants they depend on. Birds that once fed heavily on bees, such as beaters have, shifted their diets over time, turning to other insects, small reptiles, or berries. Their bright colors still dance across skies in warmer regions, but their hunting patterns have changed, following the insects that remain. Other birds thrive in these new landscapes, especially those that favor open grasslands or forests rich in seeds. In many regions, animals that depend on fruit have gradually adapted to the availability of other foods. Bears, primates, deer, and small mammals now feed more often on nuts, shoots, roots, and bark. Their diets are shaped by the plants that endured after bee-pollinated species grew less common. Some fruiting trees are still present, pollinated by beetles, ants, or human-managed robotic pollination in certain regions, but their distribution is patchy, creating pockets of abundance rather than the widespread orchards of the past. Take another slow breath as you imagine the coastlines of this future world. Mangroves, salt marshes, and tidal wetlands, many of which rely on wind or water for pollination, have expanded in certain regions. Their resilient roots weave through soft mud and shallow waters, creating nurseries for fish and birds. These ecosystems feel ancient and steady, their rhythms unchanged by the absence of bees. Soft waves lap against tangled roots, and the evening light reflects gently across calm tidal flats. Now let your awareness drift into the human world, 80 to 90 years after bees disappeared. Entire industries have reinvented themselves. Farming has shifted its foundations. Cultures have transitioned to diets shaped by grains, root vegetables, wind-pollinated fruits, and perennial crops that do not rely on bee pollination. Foods that were once everyday staples, almonds, blueberries, apples, strawberries, have become rare delicacies, grown only in specialized facilities or supported through artificial pollination managed by small fleets of robots. Across many regions, communities have adapted beautifully. Vertical farms glow softly in the night, illuminated by energy-efficient lights that nurture rows of nutrient-rich plants. In greenhouses, robotic pollinators glide quietly between blossoms, their delicate movements inspired by the bees that once danced in the sunlight. These technologies are not perfect, but they provide steady harvests, allowing people to enjoy certain foods that might otherwise have vanished. You can imagine markets in this future world. The stalls feel familiar, yet different. Rows of grains, legumes, squash, potatoes, and root vegetables fill the air with a rich, earthy aroma. New flavors have emerged, foods developed from plant species that thrived in a world without bees. Leafy greens, herbs, and edible ferns are common. Hybrid crops engineered to be wind-pollinated fill baskets and crates. Foods that once depended on bee pollination are rare treasures, savored slowly in small portions, appreciated for their link to the world long gone. In cities, parks have evolved into quiet places filled with grasses, tall wind-pollinated trees, and resilient shrubs. The hum of bees is absent, yet the wing still rustles gently through leaves, and birds still glide between branches. Children who play in these parks grow up with a different understanding of nature, less colorful, perhaps, but still filled with beauty. They learn about bees not through everyday encounters, but through stories, museums, and gentle educational exhibits that show the importance of these tiny creatures. Now take another slow breath and imagine how culture has changed. Books, documentaries, and artworks honor the memory of bees, reminding people of the intricate connections between pollinators and life. Ancient beekeeping traditions are preserved in archives, their tools displayed carefully in glass cases. Some communities hold quiet ceremonies each spring, not to mourn, but to remember. They plant wind-pollinated trees, release seeds into meadows, and teach children about the interconnectedness of all living things. 100 years after bees disappeared, the world feels stable, again different, quieter, but balanced in its own way. The Earth has restructured its rhythms. Ecosystems have reshaped themselves around the absence of bees. New species thrive where others once stood. Landscapes have settled into patterns that no longer shift rapidly, but flow gently, influenced by wind, weather, and time. Life did not end when the bees vanished. It changed. It softened. It adapted. And now, after a century, the planet has found a new equilibrium, a slower, calmer harmony built across generations. Let your breath settle, warm and slow, as we prepare to continue into the next chapter of this long, peaceful journey. In the next part of our story, we will drift beyond the 100-year mark, exploring how ecosystems evolve over centuries, how human culture matures into this quiet new world, and how nature continues its patient, subtle transformation in the long aftermath of the bees' disappearance. Take a gentle breath as we drift even further into the unfolding centuries. More than 100 years have now passed since the last bee vanished from the world, and the planet has settled into a long, quiet rhythm shaped by slow adaptation. Children born today have grown up in landscapes that feel entirely normal to them, even though someone from 2 centuries earlier would hardly recognize them. As you listen, imagine the soft hush of time drifting forward, carrying the Earth through decades of subtle transformation. Picture the world around 120 years after the bees disappeared. Ecosystems that once relied on their tireless pollination have long since reorganized. The vast fields of flowering crops that defined earlier eras have changed into patchworks of wind-pollinated agriculture, perennial fields, and quiet meadows of ferns and grasses. The palette of global plant life has shifted, creating a softer, more uniform distribution of greens, golds, and gentle browns. In many regions, forests have matured into calm, ancient groves dominated by wind-pollinated species. The canopies feel dense and steady, rich with the sound of leaves moving in slow waves. Beneath them, shade-tolerant plants carpet the forest floor, illuminated by beams of filtered sunlight. Mosses spread thickly across old stumps. Ferns gather in clusters that sway lightly in the breeze. And though the bright bursts of bee-pollinated flowers are largely absent, the woods carry their own quiet beauty, shaped by resilience, patience, and time. Let your thoughts drift deeper into this century-old transformation. Animals have continued to adapt in ways that unfold over generations. Species that once depended on fruits from bee-pollinated trees have shifted their diets, favoring nuts, bark, tender shoots, and the fruits of wind-pollinated plants. Some birds have broadened their feeding habits, learning to forage across new habitats. Small mammals explore the understory, scavenging seeds and soft roots. Insect communities have changed as well, with beetles, flies, and moths now responsible for much of the pollination that still occurs. Their rhythms fill the ecological space left behind, although the balance is quieter, slower, and less colorful. As the decades continue, imagine the world around 140 years without bees. New plant lineages begin to appear, species that evolved after generations of adapting to the absence of bee pollination. Some plants that once relied heavily on bees have shifted towards self-pollination, producing smaller, less showy flowers. Others have evolved to attract beetles, wasps, or tiny flies. The flowers that do exist in this world are often pale, subtle, and scented with faint, earthy tones. They bloom quietly beneath canopies or along forest edges, no longer needing bright petals to attract absent honeybees. Take another soft breath as we move closer to the year 160 in this imagined timeline. Human cultures have continued to adapt with creativity and care. Farming systems now rely on wind-friendly crops, climate-controlled orchards, and gentler forms of robotic pollination that evolved from the earliest machines created decades earlier. These technologies have grown quieter, softer, and more efficient over generations. In many places, small floating drones move gently through greenhouses, brushing pollen from one blossom to another with delicate precision. They hum at a pitch much softer than bees ever did, creating a faint, soothing background sound that farmers barely notice. Cities have also reshaped themselves in harmony with the changing world. Urban parks are filled with tall grasses, towering shade trees, and calming groves of wind-pollinated species. Soft carpets of moss spread beneath benches. Slow-growing shrubs line pathways that curve through open fields. Seasonal colors still change, but the transitions are gentler soft greens in spring, muted golds in summer, and earthy browns in autumn. The buzzing that once filled parks and gardens is gone, replaced by the hush of wind moving across leaves and the distant calls of birds. Imagine the cultural memory that remains. More than a century after bees disappeared, they have become symbols of the interconnectedness of life. Museums display preserved hives, ancient beekeeping tools, and recordings of the gentle hum that once filled orchards. Artists carve wooden sculptures of bees as guardians of the past. Some communities hold an annual day of pollinators, a quiet ceremony where families plant wind-pollinated trees or release seeds into meadows, acknowledging the delicate threads that connect all species. Now let your mind drift toward the year 180 without bees. Ecosystems have reached a slow, stable equilibrium. The rapid changes of the first decades have given way to calm, predictable rhythms. The plants that remained have adapted beautifully, becoming more resilient to winds, rains, and shifting climates. Forests filled with tall, swaying trees now dominate many regions, their trunks rising like pillars in an ancient hall. The understory is rich with mosses, ferns, vines, and hardy shrubs that spread gently across valleys and slopes. Grasses have evolved too. Some species had become taller, producing feathery plumes that catch the wind. Others have become dense and low, protecting themselves from grazing animals. Meadows sway like oceans of green and gold, moving with the softest breeze. Flowers are still present, delicate clusters of beetle-pollinated blossoms or tiny petals shaped for flies, but they feel like quiet accents rather than the vibrant displays that once colored entire fields. Take another gentle breath as we approach the 200-year mark. 2 centuries without bees have created a world with its own kind of harmony. New forms of life have risen to fill ecological roles once dominated by bee-pollinated plants. Shrubs with tougher flowers thrive in valleys. Trees with wind-friendly pollen shape entire forests. Wetlands filled with reeds and grasses support thriving bird populations. Marshlands shimmer in the morning light, reflecting the soft movements of plants that depend only on breeze and water for reproduction. Human diets have continued to evolve in parallel. Staple foods come from grains, roots, legumes, leafy greens, tubers, and wind-pollinated fruits that were bred across generations to flourish without insect pollinators. Artificial pollination exists, but is reserved for cultural crops plants that carry deep meaning or historic flavor. A few fruits remain, grown in specialized sanctuaries, treasured for their link to the past. People savor them slowly, celebrating the memory of the landscapes that once existed. And now, 200 years after bees vanished, the world stands as a testament to resilience. Life has not vanished, it has transformed. Ecosystems have settled into new patterns. Forests breathe with steady rhythms. Meadows move like gentle tides. Wildlife has adapted, diversified, and endured. Human cultures have learned, grown, and reshaped their traditions. The absence of bees changed the planet, but across centuries, the Earth discovered a quieter kind of balance, built from patience, time, and the delicate weaving of new ecological threads. Let your breath settle softly now, as we prepare to drift further into the deep future, exploring the world many centuries ahead, long after the memory of bees has settled into legend. Take a slow, gentle breath as we drift further into the deep future. 2 centuries have already passed since bees disappeared from the Earth, and the world has grown into a calm, steady, and quietly transformed version of itself. Now, as we move deeper into this imagined timeline, the centuries stretch softly before us, like long, rolling hills covered in morning mist. Life continues, shaped not by the presence of bees, but by the echoes of what they once were. Imagine the world 300 years after the last bee vanished. By now, the rapid shifts of the early decades are no longer living memory. Entire landscapes have stabilized into mature ecological systems that rely on wind, chants, or small groups of beetles and flies for the pollination that still occurs. Meadows that once held bursts of color have become calm expanses of tall grasses and pale blossoms, moving gently in the breeze like an endless ocean of green. Forests are dominated by species whose reproduction depends on the wind, their pollen rising in golden waves each spring before settling softly across the land. Let your thoughts drift into these forests. They feel ancient, serene, and full of quiet depth. Towering pines, birches, oaks, and poplars sway in rhythm with the seasons. Their canopies form vaulted ceilings of soft, filtered light. Beneath them, the understory is rich with ferns, hardy vines, mosses, and slow-growing shrubs. Some flowers still appear every spring, but they are modest, small, pale, and adapted to beetles or self-pollination. Their gentle scents drift only a short distance, no longer needing to call to bees that no longer exist. Animals living in this era have inherited the adaptations of many generations. Species that once depended on bee-pollinated fruits now flourish on nuts, seeds, roots, and the resilient fruiting plants that evolved to survive without bees. Rodents forage through leaf litter for seeds that fall from wind-pollinated trees. Birds nest among branches that sway high above calm, open valleys. Larger mammals browse on shoots and grasses, thriving in ecosystems that feel quieter but abundant in their own way. As the centuries stretch toward the 300-year mark, imagine human civilization continuing to transcend old limitations. Agriculture has matured into a deeply stable system, supported by crops bred across generations to thrive without bees. Vast wind-pollinated orchards designed through centuries of selective cultivation produce fruits that earlier humans would barely recognize, yet which feel completely natural to the people living now. Tall grain fields sweep across continents in elegant patterns, nourished by predictable seasons and centuries of agricultural refinement. In many regions, floating pollination drones are still used in specialized facilities. They glide silently between blossoms of heritage crops plants, preserved not because they are necessary for survival, but because they carry meaning, history, and beauty. These sanctuaries feel like living museums, offering a quiet space where people can connect with the deep past, tasting fruits that once depended on bees alone. The gentle hum of these delicate machines is faint, almost meditative, a soft echo of a sound that once belonged to living wings. Now imagine stepping into a cultural hall in this distant future. Inside, on smooth wooden shelves, sit ancient honey jars sealed centuries before the disappearance of bees. They are treasured relics, carefully preserved behind glass, their golden contents untouched. Next to them, delicate carvings depict bees as symbols of interconnectedness, community, and perseverance. Children gather to hear stories about the creatures that once shaped the world through quiet, tireless work. To them, bees are like mythical animals, real, documented, but belonging to an age long vanished. Take a slow, calming breath as you picture the architecture of cities in this era. Green terraces cascade down tall buildings, filled not with flowers designed to attract bees, but with hardy ferns, mosses, and wind-pollinated shrubs. Parks are peaceful spaces of tall grasses, sweeping tree canopies, and stone pathways. They feel timeless, designed for stillness, reflection, and gentle movement. The absence of bees is not noticed anymore, only understood by historians and ecologists who study the ancient rhythms of a different world. Continue drifting through time, and now imagine the world 4 centuries after the last bee disappeared. 400 years span longer than the rise and fall of many civilizations. Over this vast interval, the planet's ecosystems have not only stabilized, they have become deeply rooted in their new identity. New plant lineages exist that never overlapped with bees at all, shaped by centuries of evolution. Their flowers are subtle, small, pale, often closed and self-fertilizing. Some reproduce through wind-scattered seeds, others through underground runners. Their survival does not rely on bright colors or sweet nectar, because in this world, such strategies no longer serve a purpose. Forests feel ancient and immense. Valleys carved by streams are lined with reeds, sedges, and grasses that ripple like silk in the wind. Wetlands thrive with life. Marshlands glow softly under rising suns. Birds nest in trees that grew from seeds carried by storms centuries before. Every living thing has woven itself into a stable pattern, a quiet choreography of existence without bees. Let your awareness expand into the coastlines of this distant future. Mangrove forests stretch along warm oceans, their roots twisting like intricate sculptures. Salt marshes support thriving bird colonies. Tidal wetlands brim with young fish that shelter among wind-pollinated plants. The world's great river deltas, reshaped slowly over centuries, carry sediment downstream to create new land, and those lands are quickly colonized by hardy grasses and shrubs that thrive in salty, windswept environments. Even the oceans feel subtly different. Not because bees once touched them directly, but because the webs of ecosystems that flow from the land to the sea have rebalanced themselves. Some fruits that once fell into rivers no longer do, but new plants have taken their place, feeding aquatic species with seeds and organic debris shaped by this new ecological order. Now take a slow, steady breath. 400 years have passed, and humanity has changed with the planet. People live in a world that feels calm, steady, and deeply connected to the rhythms of wind, water, and growth. They know of bees the way we know of extinct animals from ancient ages through records, fossils, stories, and the quiet sadness of understanding what once was. But they also know that life continues, reshaping itself always, responding to change with patience and creativity. In this far future, the absence of bees is not a daily concern. It is a chapter of history, a lesson in interdependence, a reminder of how one small creature once shaped the world in gentle, essential ways. As this soft, quiet century unfolds, the Earth carries on slowly, calmly, resiliently guided by the same patient principles that have governed life since the beginning. Take a slow, easy breath and let yourself drift back into our quiet, unfolding timeline. Centuries have now passed since the last bee took its final flight, and Earth is moving into an era shaped by absence, adaptation, and the slow creativity of nature. In this peaceful stretch of time, ecosystems continue to shift, settle, and reshape themselves in ways that are both surprising and beautiful. As you listen, imagine yourself watching this future world from a soft, quiet vantage point, as though sitting beside a window that looks out across hundreds of years. 300 years after bees vanished, the world feels familiar in some ways and entirely new in others. Forests have grown denser in places where wind pollination dominates, while other regions have opened into wide grassy landscapes where fruit trees once stood. Many flowering plants that depended completely on bees have faded into memory, leaving behind only faint traces in sediments and preserved seeds. Yet this loss has not created an empty world. Instead, new plant communities have emerged, shaped by birds, wind, bats, and small mammals that now carry the responsibility once held by bees. Imagine walking through a meadow in this future era. Instead of the colorful variety once created by bee-pollinated flowers, the meadow is now dominated by grasses, sedges, and wind-pollinated shrubs that release their pollen into the air in gentle clouds. The soundscape is noticeably different too. Instead of the warm hum of bees moving between blossoms, you hear the rustling of grass, the calls of birds, and the soft fluttering of moths that now take on more of the pollination role. Even though this world is quieter, it is still alive, still growing, still adapting to the absence of its long-lost pollinators. By year 400, more dramatic changes become visible. Certain fruit trees, like apples and almonds, have become rare outside of cultivation. Wild varieties that once depended almost entirely on bees now survive only in a few pockets where humans still maintain them. In these sheltered groves, children learn stories about what bees once were. Small, gentle insects that shaped entire civilizations. In art, bees become symbols of patience, harmony, and the fragile balance between living things. Although the world has learned to survive without them, people still feel a quiet longing for the life that used to fill the air with gentle buzzing. Now imagine a deep forest, 450 years into this new era. The canopy is thicker, the undergrowth dimmer, and the air heavy with the scent of pine and earth. Wind-pollinated trees dominate the skyline, their wide crowns spreading out in layered green terraces. Where flowering shrubs once formed colorful understories, now ferns and mosses thrive. Birds have taken up roles once shared with bees, carrying pollen between plants that still rely on animal helpers. Some flowers have evolved to open only at night, attracting nocturnal pollinators with subtle scents instead of bright colors. Nature continues to try, to adjust, to reinvent old relationships in new ways. At the 500-year mark, evolution begins to leave clearer signatures. Certain plants that once required bees have developed new strategies, creating blossoms that are more accessible to beetles, flies, and birds. Some flowers have grown larger to attract bats, while others have become smaller and simpler, shifting toward wind pollination entirely. The planet's plant life is now a tapestry woven from resilience and necessity. The world is different, but still vibrant, still growing, still filled with green life that finds ways to persist. Agriculture, too, has changed over these centuries. Humanity learned early on that life without bees required ingenuity. Artificial pollination systems improved over time, evolving from simple hand tools into intricate networks of automated drones and soft mechanical pollinators. Over hundreds of years, these systems became reliable enough to support orchards, vegetable farms, and seed production facilities. The global food system adapted, focusing more on crops that thrive without bees. Grains, root vegetables, and hardy fruit varieties became the foundation of diets across many regions. People still enjoy the fruits that once relied on bees, but they exist as special harvests now, grown in carefully maintained pollination zones where machines hum softly through the air. Picture a large orchard in the year 550. Rows of trees stretch out beneath a warm sun, and drifting through the branches are small, quiet drones, moving slow and steady, touching each blossom with delicate precision. The orchard feels peaceful, calm, and methodical, a blend of nature and gentle technology. Workers tend to the trees with the same care farmers once showed centuries before, but the buzzing in the air is no longer from bees. It is the soft mechanical hum of artificial helpers carrying out tasks once performed by living creatures. 600 years after the loss of bees, ecosystems show clear signs of long-term adaptation. New hybrid plant species have emerged, combining traits inherited from ancestors that relied on bees with features suited for alternative pollinators. Some plants have developed self-pollinating mechanisms, producing fruits and seeds without needing to be visited by animals or wind at all. These self-sufficient plants thrive in quiet pockets of the world, creating unique ecosystems that feel serene and slightly otherworldly, filled with blossoms that bloom for beauty rather than for bees. Imagine now a mountain valley 650 years into the future. The air is crisp, the slopes covered with pine forests, and the meadows dotted with hardy wildflowers that open reluctantly, as though remembering a relationship that no longer exists. In this quiet setting, you can almost sense the echo of what once was a world where bees moved from bloom to bloom, carrying life across the landscape. But the valley is not empty. Birds circle overhead. Moths drift lazily from one twilight flower to another. Life has not disappeared, only rearranged itself in new forms. 700 years after the disappearance of bees, the world has entered a stable rhythm again. Entire ecosystems have shifted, but they have reached a kind of equilibrium. Without bees, some species have vanished, but others have risen to fill the spaces left behind. The planet carries the memory of bees within its history, its sediments, and its cultural stories. Yet it has also become a place shaped by resilience, quiet persistence, and slow transformation. It is a different world, a calmer world, but still a living one. Let your breathing fall into a slow, peaceful rhythm as we drift further into this far future world. The centuries continue to pass quietly now, and Earth is approaching a full millennium since the last bee disappeared. With each passing generation, the story of bees becomes less of a memory and more of a legend, a gentle echo of a creature that once tied together countless parts of the natural world. As you listen, imagine time flowing like a slow, steady river, carrying us deeper into an age shaped by adaptation, patience, and the quiet resilience of life. 900 years after the disappearance of bees, plant life has settled firmly into its new order. Entire biomes have reorganized themselves around the species that thrive without bee pollination. Forests dominated by conifers, oaks, and wind-pollinated trees now stretch across many regions where flowering orchards once grew. Meadows feel softer, more muted, filled with grasses and hardy blossoms visited mostly by moths, flies, beetles, and small birds. Though the world has lost the bright diversity once created by bee-pollinated flowers, it has gained new, subtle forms of beauty, long swaying grasses, tall seed heads, and low shrubs with delicate, wind-borne blossoms. As the millennium approaches, some plants that survived the early centuries have fully transitioned into new evolutionary paths. A few species that once required bees have developed completely independent reproductive cycles. Some form self-fertile flowers that quietly pollinate themselves before they even open. Others have shifted to produce lightweight pollen that drifts easily in the wind. A handful have adapted to birds or bats, growing taller, brighter, or more aromatic, to attract the animals that now carry their pollen. Nature continues to experiment in slow, patient ways, generation after generation. Imagine walking through a forest in the year 950. Sunlight filters through tall canopies that sway gently in the wind. Instead of the buzzing of bees, you hear the flutter of wings from small birds moving between branches, feeding on fruit that evolved with their help. Some fruits are smaller now, some are larger, and some have grown tougher skins to survive in a world where fewer creatures carry their seeds. Fewer trees rely on fleshy fruit at all. Many now spread their seeds through the air or by clinging to the feathers of passing birds. By the time 1,000 years have passed, the world's ecosystems feel ancient and rebalanced. Most people alive at this time have never seen a flower shaped specifically for bees. They know bees only through old illustrations, preserved specimens, and quiet stories passed down through families. In museums, children look at the delicate, striped bodies of bees, with the same wonder their ancestors once reserved for mammoths or giant ancient birds. They learn that these small creatures once held together entire food webs, and they imagine the soft hum that once filled gardens, orchards, and meadows. Human civilization, too, has adapted across these centuries. Agriculture is now fully centered around crops that thrive without bees or crops maintained through precise artificial pollination systems. These systems operate with gentle efficiency, powered by clean energy and guided by technologies that evolved far beyond the simple drones of earlier ages. Most food production happens in large, environmentally controlled landscapes, where flowering crops are tended by soft robotic pollinators designed to work in harmony with the plants. In rural regions, People still hand-pollinate certain heritage crops to preserve them for cultural and historical reasons, continuing traditions that stretch back centuries. Imagine a massive vertical farm built 1,000 years after bees vanished. Inside, rows of fruit trees bloom under warm, artificial sunlight. Mechanical pollinators glide slowly between blossoms, glowing softly like drifting lanterns. The air is calm and warm, filled with the scent of flowers maintained through gentle human care. People walk through these farms with quiet appreciation, knowing that these blossoms exist only because of the effort invested in keeping them alive. Each fruit harvested here is a reminder of what the world once relied upon bees to do. Across the natural world, wildlife has changed too. Birds have shifted into new ecological roles, filling some of the spaces bees once held. Moths and butterflies carry pollen between dusk-opening flowers. Beetles, flies, and even small mammals continue to build their own relationships with the blossoms that remain. Although the complexity of the past is gone, these new relationships form a simpler but stable kind of balance. Animals adapt to what remains, and plants adapt in return, creating networks of life that feel quiet, steady, and ancient. As centuries continue to roll gently forward, flowering plants that once relied exclusively on bees now exist mostly as preserved specimens, cultivated gardens, or living archives. Botanic sanctuaries maintain collections of long-lost blossoms, tended by experts who dedicate their lives to keeping these species alive. In these sanctuaries, visitors walk through corridors of ancient flowers, apples, cherries, blueberries, almonds, squash, knowing that outside these carefully maintained spaces, nature has moved on. The gardens glow with blossoms that feel almost mythic, preserved pieces of a world that disappeared many centuries ago. Now imagine Earth 1,050 years after bees. Entire landscapes have settled into new rhythms. Wide grasslands ripple in the wind, where orchards once grew. Pine forests dominate high latitudes. Wetlands are filled with reeds and sedges that spread through airborne pollen. Along coastlines, salt-tolerant shrubs create dense thickets where bees once danced between coastal wildflowers. Nature feels quieter, gentler, slower, shaped by processes that no longer rely on the constant movement of tiny pollinators. In this new era, scientists continue to study the long-term effects of the disappearance of bees. They examined sediments, fossil pollen, preserved flowers, and genetic archives to understand how quickly evolution responded. They mapped the spread of new hybrid species. They traced the descent of plants that once relied heavily on bees and now thrive through entirely different means. Their work helps humanity understand not just what was lost, but also how life transforms across immense spans of time. As this chapter comes to a gentle close, imagine the 1,000-year mark as a quiet turning point. The memory of bees still exists, preserved in stories, songs, symbols, and carefully tended gardens. But the planet itself has settled into its new shape. Life has continued, reshaped itself, and found new ways to grow. The world is softer, calmer, and deeply changed, but still full of movement, color, and quiet resilience. Take another slow, comfortable breath as we continue drifting forward through time. We have already traveled more than 1,000 years beyond the disappearance of bees, and the Earth you are about to imagine now exists in an era shaped entirely by adaptation and quiet resilience. Let the calm rhythm of this story guide your thoughts gently, like a steady tide pulling you deeper into rest. By the year 1100, the memories of bees have softened into quiet myths. The world's oldest botanical archives still preserve their delicate forms, but ordinary people no longer have a living reference for what a bee truly was. To them, bees exist like ancient dragons or legendary birds real in the past, but now wrapped in a haze of wonder. Yet the mark bees left on Earth remains etched into the land, the forests, the sediments, and the cultural stories still whispered across generations. Imagine standing in a broad valley during this era. The landscape feels calm and open, shaped by centuries of slow ecological change. Grasses ripple in long, quiet waves. Tall, wind-pollinated trees stretch their branches wide, releasing pale clouds of pollen into the air each spring. The meadow flowers that once depended on bees are gone now, replaced by subtle blossoms shaped for beetles, flies, and nocturnal moths. It is a gentler world, quieter than the one that came before, but still full of life. By year 1200, humans continue refining the systems that support the crops bees once maintained. Artificial pollination has become elegant and nearly effortless, guided by soft machines designed to mimic the delicacy of an insect's touch. In orchards, small mechanical gliders move slowly between blossoms, glowing with soft light, like drifting stars. People visit these orchards the way their ancestors visited museums, grateful for every fruit these delicate systems produce. Each apple, each cherry, each almond is a reminder of what the world once created on its own. In natural forests, evolution continues its slow work. Some tree species that once relied on bees have vanished entirely, leaving behind fossils and preserved seeds in scientific collections. Others have risen in their place hybrids, mutations, and quietly adaptive newcomers that thrive through wind, birds, or self-pollination. Evolution moves slowly, but across centuries it becomes visible. Leaves shift in shape. Roots spread in new patterns. Flowers shrink, expand, brighten, or fade, all responding to a world where bees no longer guide their survival. Imagine visiting a lake surrounded by forest in the year 1250. The water is calm. Reeds sway gently at the shoreline. The air is filled with the sounds of birds and nocturnal insects. The landscape feels older somehow, as though time has carved a softer rhythm into its edges. The absence of bees is noticeable only in the details, the types of flowers blooming at the water's edge, the shape of seed pods drifting on the breeze, the species of birds that now carry pollen between the remaining blossoms. Human cultures, too, have changed in subtle ways. Bees once held symbolic meaning in thousands of traditions, symbols of community, diligence, renewal, and harmony. Now those symbols have deepened into reverence. Artists create sculptures of bees from ancient descriptions. Musicians compose soft, meditative pieces inspired by the idea of a gentle hum that once floated across summer fields. Poets write verses about a world that carried life on tiny wings. The bee has become more than an insect. It has become a quiet emblem of fragility, memory, and interconnectedness. By year 1300, ecosystems once devastated by the loss of bees have rebuilt themselves in entirely new directions. Coastal plains are covered in tall grasses and salt-tolerant shrubs. Forests in temperate regions lean toward tree species that spread pollen through the wind. In tropical environments, bats and birds maintain relationships with flowers that evolved slowly over many centuries to accommodate them. Though the planet no longer carries the vibrant diversity of bee-pollinated blossoms, it flourishes in different ways, shaped by new colors, new scents, and new ecological rhythms. Picture a high mountain valley around this time. Ice-fed streams trickle down from distant peaks. Hardy alpine plants cling to thin soil, using wind and small insects to reproduce. A few flowers still open wide at twilight to attract moths, their pale petals glowing faintly in the dimming light. If you stand quietly, you can hear the fluttering wings of nocturnal pollinators moving through the cold air. This valley feels peaceful, ancient, and completely adapted to the world that exists now. Across human civilizations, carefully maintained bee archives remain places of quiet pilgrimage. People visit to see preserved specimens under soft lighting, gazing at the delicate wings and fine hairs that once carried life from blossom to blossom. Children marvel at how small bees were, how gentle their forms look, and how profoundly they shaped the world. These archives serve as reminders of the responsibilities humans now carry to care for the plants bees once protected, and to remember the lessons written in the quiet history of their disappearance. Now imagine Earth around the year 1400. Many of the world's landscapes feel settled, balanced, and fully transformed. Grassy plains stretch across regions where orchards once bloomed. Coniferous forests dominate high latitudes, while wetlands pulse with reeds and sedges shaped by wind-borne pollen. Coastal dunes are covered with shrubs that spread through tough, self-fertile blossoms. And in the calm of evening, moths drift silently between the flowers that still depend on living couriers. The world is no longer grieving the loss of bees. It has moved into a new ecological era, one shaped by quiet persistence rather than buzzing activity. Nature has reorganized itself. Plants have shifted. Animals have adapted. Humans have learned to support what nature can no longer do on its own. And through all these centuries, life has continued, finding new balance points in a world transformed. As this chapter draws to a calm and gentle close, imagine standing at the edge of a forest shaped by 1,000 years without bees. The air is soft. The leaves sway quietly. And though the world has changed, it remains full of life, shaped by time, resilience, and the quiet creativity of nature. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders fall into softness, and drift back into our long, gentle timeline. More than 14 centuries have now passed since the last bee disappeared from Earth, and the world has grown into a place reshaped by time, adaptation, and the quiet determination of nature. As we move through this next chapter, imagine the steady passage of centuries like soft waves rolling across a calm shore. By the year 1500, the landscapes of Earth feel ancient in their new forms. Meadows that once glowed with colorful bee-pollinated flowers now shimmer with tall grasses and wind-swept seed heads. Forests are dominated by resilient species that adapted centuries ago, their branches carrying blossoms shaped for birds, bats, beetles, and the wind. In many regions, subtle fragrances drift through the air during early mornings and warm evenings, scents designed to attract moths, flies, and the small creatures that now tend to the remaining flowering plants. Imagine walking into a deep woodland during this era. The air feels cool and rich with the smell of earth and old leaves. Soft moss covers the ground in velvety green carpets, and ferns bend gently under the weight of dew. You may notice small clusters of flowers tucked between tree roots, opening at night to catch the movement of moths. Their petals glow faintly in the moonlight, shaped by centuries of quiet evolution. These flowers no longer resemble the blossoms bees once visited, yet they hold their own serene beauty. By the 1600-year mark, humanity has refined artificial pollination into a seamless, almost artistic practice. In vast agricultural sanctuaries, delicate drones move between blossoms with slow precision, each glide accompanied by a soft hum that echoes lightly in the air. Far above these farms, floating greenhouses orbit gently in controlled environments, preserving heritage crops that can no longer survive in the wild. These greenhouses are filled with warmth, soft light, and the scents of petals and fruit, a quiet reflection of what once grew freely across fields and orchards. Culturally, bees have taken on a symbolic weight that deepens with each generation. They appear in stories that children hear before sleep, tales of small helpers that once carried life between blossoms. In some traditions, bees represent balance. In others, they symbolize harmony, patience, or the delicate threads connecting living systems. Artworks often depict a gentle golden insect resting on a flower, glowing softly like a memory of a world long past. People look at these images with reverence, knowing how profoundly such tiny creatures shaped the natural world. Now imagine the world around year 1650. River valleys are lined with trees that release pollen in warm winds. Wetlands ripple with reeds, sedges, and plants that grow through self-reliance. Alpine meadows bloom with hardy flowers that use birds or small mammals as pollinators. In forests, large blossoms shaped for bats glow with pale colors and release sweet, heavy fragrances after dusk. This world carries a quiet, mystical feel, shaped by the long patience of evolution adapting to what remains. Animals have adapted too. Bird species that once played minor pollination roles have developed specialized beaks, feathers, and feeding habits. Bats have expanded their range in many regions, following the flowers that evolved to depend on them. Certain beetles and moths now carry pollen across longer distances than their ancestors ever did, forming new ecological relationships that feel ancient and steady. These networks are simpler than the ones bees once orchestrated, yet they function with a quiet dependability that suits this new era. By 1700 years without bees, landscapes that once depended heavily on them show signs of deep transformation. In places where fruit orchards once thrived, wide, grassy plains now stretch across the horizon. The colors of these plains shift through the seasons: green in spring, gold in summer, soft brown in autumn, creating peaceful, sweeping vistas shaped by wind and time. In mountainous regions, forests have grown denser in some areas and thinner in others, balancing themselves around the plant species that survived the centuries of change. Imagine, now, a preserved botanical sanctuary in the year 1750. Inside, pale light shined through high glass ceilings. Rows of ancient flowers are tended with meticulous care. Soft mechanical petals mimic the gentle touch of bees, brushing each blossom with careful precision. These flowers bloom in colors that no longer exist in the wild, deep purples, bright yellows, rich blues, and soft pinks. Visitors walk quietly among these blossoms, feeling as though they are stepping into a dream of a world that once existed long ago. Humanity continues to pass down knowledge of bees through these sanctuaries, through art, and through the stories still told across generations. Children learn about ecosystems and interdependence by hearing how bees once connected plants, animals, and people. Their teachers show them diagrams of ancient pollination systems, explaining how even the smallest creatures can shape entire worlds. These lessons become part of cultural identity, reminders of humility, responsibility, and the importance of caring for what remains. Now, imagine Earth around the year 1800 without bees. The planet feels both familiar and otherworldly. Winds carry pollen across vast distances. Flowers bloom mostly at night, glowing faintly under the stars. Birds with specialized feathers move through forests, Dusted with pollen, they gather unconsciously. Bats drift across the sky in slow arcs, drawn to blossoms that greet them with soft scents. Though the world is different, it has not become empty. It has become something quieter, older, and filled with new rhythms. As this chapter draws to a peaceful close, imagine standing at the edge of a field shaped by 18 centuries of quiet, steady change. The grasses sway gently. New blossoms glow under the soft moonlight. Creatures move through the landscape with a calm certainty that this is the world they were born into. And as you look out across this future Earth, you can feel how life continues, always adapting, always finding balance, always carrying on. Take one more slow breath as we move into the final stretch of our journey. The world we have been exploring has transformed over nearly 2,000 years since the last bee drifted between flowers. Each century carried changes so gradual and patient that most people alive in those eras barely noticed them. Yet across the great span of time, the planet reshaped itself entirely. This last chapter will carry us gently through the remaining centuries, into the deep quiet of a world that has long adapted, long evolved, and long remembered the tiny creatures that once held entire ecosystems together. Imagine Earth around the year 2000 without bees. The planet has settled into a rhythm that feels old, calm, and deeply rooted in the systems that emerged after the early centuries of ecological upheaval. Where orchards once bloomed in spring, tall grasses now sway in long golden waves. The air holds the soft whisper of wind, the distant call of birds, and the flutter of moths moving delicately through the night. It is a peaceful soundscape, shaped not by buzzing but by the gentle movements of life that found new paths after the bees were gone. Forest canopies have grown thicker in many regions, their branches filled with blossoms adapted for birds and bats. Some flowers glow faintly under moonlight, guiding nocturnal pollinators through the darkness. Others release scents designed to travel farther, carried by the wind in cool night air. Plants that once relied entirely on bees have either found new strategies or retreated into quiet sanctuaries preserved by human hands. Most species have moved on, shifting into ecological roles shaped by centuries of experimentation. Now imagine a deep valley during this era, a place where time seems to pool like a quiet lake. In the stillness of early morning, mist drifts between the trees. Grasses bend gently beneath the weight of dew. The colors here are softer than in our time muted greens, pale yellows, soft browns, and occasional blossoms glowing with subtle pastels. It is not the vibrant diversity of a bee-filled world, but it carries its own quiet elegance. Every plant, every creature, every drifting seed is part of an ecosystem that has learned to breathe differently. Humanity continues to honor the legacy of bees in ways that blend science, art, and memory. In cities, small observatories display preserved bees under warm, gentle light. Visitors move quietly through these spaces, reading stories about pollination, ecosystems, and the delicate threads that once connected living things. Some children press their hands to the glass, marveling at how tiny bees were, how fragile, and how much life they carried on wings no larger than a fingernail. Teachers explain how the world changed, how plants adapted, and how people learned to care for what remained. In some traditions, bees have become symbols of hope. Their images appear in tapestries, stained glass windows, sculptures, and quiet rituals meant to remind people of balance and harmony. Festivals honor the memory of pollinators with floating lanterns shaped like tiny wings. Communities gather to celebrate the resilience of nature and the importance of stewardship. These celebrations are calm, reflective, and deeply rooted in gratitude for the lessons carried across centuries. By year 2100, without bees, artificial pollination systems have reached a level of refinement that feels almost organic. In large botanical sanctuaries, delicate machines move between blossoms with soft, glowing precision. They mimic the gentle touch bees once provided, carrying pollen in tiny fibers that resemble brush-soft hairs. Some machines resemble floating petals, drifting quietly between flowering branches. Others glide along invisible tracks, controlled by subtle algorithms that respond to the needs of each bloom. People still cultivate heritage crops, apples, cherries, almonds, blueberries, not because the world depends on them anymore, but because these fruits carry cultural meaning. They are symbols of the past, flavors from a world shaped by bees. These orchards feel almost sacred. Visitors walk among the trees with a sense of reverence, knowing that each blossom is tended carefully, deliberately, and lovingly. Now imagine Earth around the year 2500. The landscapes have entered a phase of deep stability. Grasslands have expanded across continents, sweeping outward like soft, golden oceans. Forests dominated by wind-pollinated trees cast long shadows across ancient valleys. Wetlands have become rich sanctuaries for birds, amphibians, and insects. Flowers are fewer now, but each one is significant, each one shaped by centuries of evolution toward new relationships with moths, beetles, and birds. Some flowers open only at night, glowing faintly under starlight. Their petals catch moonbeams like small lanterns. When a moth lands gently on their surface, the flower trembles slightly in the cool air. It is a quiet choreography, delicate, slow, and deeply peaceful. These blossoms are living reminders that nature never stops changing, never stops finding ways to thrive. In the far north, tundras have developed their own post-bee ecosystems. Hardy shrubs release pollen into the wind. Small mammals carry seeds through snowfields. In warm regions, flowering cacti open wide at dusk, offering deep, glowing bowls of nectar to the bats that drift through warm twilight skies. Every part of the world has found its own balance, its own answer to the absence of bees. By the year 3000, without bees, new evolutionary branches have emerged. Some plants, once reliant on bees, have developed entirely self-contained reproductive cycles. They form tiny internal chambers where pollen settles naturally, creating seeds without relying on external movement. Others have formed relationships with specialized insects that evolved long after bees were gone. Slow-moving beetles with soft hairs, delicate flies with long tongues, tiny nocturnal moths guided by pale scents drifting green. Through the night, these ecosystems feel ancient, almost mythical. The silence of their evolution gives them a dreamlike quality, as though time itself moves differently in these landscapes. Cultural memory continues to honor the bee as a symbol of interconnectedness. In some regions, people keep small shrine gardens filled with preserved flowers from the old world. They place small golden carvings of bees beside these blossoms, honoring both the past and the lessons learned from it. Stories are still told at bedtime, stories of buzzing meadows, orchards glowing in morning light, and gardens alive with gentle movement. Children listen with wide eyes, imagining a world filled with bright flowers and drifting bees, even though they have never seen one. Now imagine the world 4,000 years after the disappearance of bees. At this stage, the planet has fully settled into an era shaped by wind, birds, bats, beetles, and time itself. Meadows ripple endlessly, their grasses shifting in gentle waves. Forests stretch across continents, breathing in long cycles of growth and renewal. In this world, pollination happens quietly, steadily, almost invisibly. Without bees, nature has built new threads, simpler but strong enough to hold ecosystems together. Artificial pollination still exists, but it has taken on a ritual-like feel. It is no longer a necessity. It is a cultural tradition, a way of remembering the past. In some regions, people tend small orchards purely as living memorials, their blossoms pollinated by soft, glowing machines drifting like lanterns on warm spring evenings. The fruit that grows here is treasured, not because it feeds communities, but because it connects people across time. Now picture Earth in the far, distant future, 5,000 years without bees. The world is calm. The landscapes feel ancient and wise. Ecosystems have been shaped by patience, by adaptation, by balance. Flowers bloom in quiet colors. Winds carry pollen across valleys. Moonlit blossoms open for moths and bats. The world is alive, resilient, and filled with soft patterns of motion that soothe the senses. And as we gently reach the end of this long journey, imagine yourself standing on a quiet hill, overlooking a world shaped by time. The grass moves like slow water. The sky glows softly with fading light. The air is cool and still. This is a world that remembers bees, honors them, and has grown into something new in their absence. Take a final, slow breath. Let your thoughts drift like pollen on a gentle wind. Let your body soften into stillness, and allow sleep to arrive naturally, carried quietly by the memory of wings that once hummed gently through the world. Thank you for being here, and good night.